Hey there. This episode originally aired on my Patreon many months ago, so some of the information might be a little bit outdated by now. If you'd like to check out episodes as soon as they come out, you can join my $3 tier over there, or you can subscribe to check out full episodes coming here eventually. Either way, the choice is yours. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pat's Creative Podcast, episode 4, hopefully, if all things go according to plan. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest known as Lorenzo. He has been a creator on YouTube as well as other platforms for a very long time now. I discovered him back in 2015, I think, or so. I've been watching him since, and I'm very glad to have him on the show. Lorenzo, would you care to kind of introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Lorenzo de Sequera. I'm a Canadian musician and producer. I also do videography, photography, graphic design, web development. So tend to do a lot of things these days. I primarily create music and also do some content creation on YouTube as well. I used to focus a lot more on content creation, but these days I've been doing a lot more music, focusing on growing on digital music platforms like Spotify. I just look at YouTube now as one of the many avenues that I release on. I recently soft relaunched my channel, starting over after a 3-year hiatus, because I did go back to school and I moved cross country, so that's going to take a big chunk out of my life. But yeah, what I'm mainly focusing on is I actually did move in with my girlfriend, Julia Henderson, who's also a musician. So we've been working on a lot of Persona 5 music specifically, and we've got enough songs that we're pretty much gearing towards an album now. We're just going to keep that momentum going. Some of you may already know me as Zurachi, though, because I did cut my teeth doing game reviews and top 10s years ago from, I would say, about like 2012 to 2015, around that period. But I don't really do that anymore. But if you are curious to see that kind of content, if you've checked my channel, you might notice that all those videos are actually down, but I've opened up a back door where you can view some of that. If you just go to the playlist section of my channel, you'll be able to see some of that right there. But otherwise, I've pretty much retired that content.
Right. Now, it's worth mentioning, I was introduced to Lorenzo, or at the time known as Zurachi, through that particular content. So I kind of feel like this is a good jumping point, if you will. Would you care to talk about what your thought process was when changing your channel name and rebranding and kind of heading towards a different direction on YouTube in general?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess starting with the game reviews and top 10s themselves, that kind of content, I originally did not even plan to do long term, like even as much as 3 videos. Because here's what happened. I started my channel in 2012 just for fun, with the original intention of just doing a few videos and that's it. But when I believe it was my 3rd video, top 10 SNES video games, that video just blew up because it was actually Jimmy Wetzel and Balrog that discovered my channel. And this was back when YouTube likes actually worked. They liked my video and it sent my video to all of their subscribers, and my channel blew up from literally 10 subscribers to 800.
Right. I remember
in a span of a day.
Yeah, they had a system to where all of your liked videos would appear on your channel page, right? So I felt like liking videos was like a big network, bigger than it is now.
Yeah, back then, it would just send it to everyone's front page. That's always the first thing you saw was what other creators would like.
That's crazy. I didn't even know that. I would discover a lot of people through likes page on the actual channel. I didn't realize they would recommend it specifically because another creator liked that. That's definitely not something that happens these days. At least I doubt it.
Yeah, so big channels had a lot of power back then.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, I discovered so many channels, and like you said, around that kind of community with Balrog and Jimmy Wetzel and stuff like that, just through finding the liked videos on people's specific channels. Nowadays, when you leave a like, it just a number appears on the video, which is cool, but it's buried in some playlist that no one would probably search through that gets thousands and thousands of videos, It's definitely not the same effect as it used to. Would you like to explain a little bit as to the change to your actual name specifically and kind of your move towards... I mean, you still do have gaming involvement, right? You still do work a little bit with game music, but you could explain just where your direction is right now with regards to music?
Yeah, sure. So going with the name, after 3 years and starting to think about coming back to my channel, I completely felt a big disconnect with the name Zurachi. because it didn't feel like me anymore. I didn't connect to that version of myself anymore. Not to mention, I'm 31 now. I don't know why I want to continue using a name that I came up with when I was playing World of Warcraft. So there's also that. Also, in the world of music, typically, it's fine if you go under an alias, but typically you're taken a bit more seriously if you just use your name instead of meeting other musicians being like, hey, I'm Zurachi, hey.
Right.
Like, ultimately, when I use my own name, there's a lot more accountability that ties into that too. So if I put something out, I better be really proud of what I put out. Like, it can't be something that's just half-baked.
Right. And do you feel with like Zurachi, it kind of felt like because you're under this alias, you're not only more confined to like gaming stuff or whatever you built your brand off of, but do you also feel like you almost couldn't fully express yourself because you weren't branding yourself as yourself, thus feeling like their deepest of projects or whatnot, you just couldn't really associate with the Zurachi name?
Yeah, that was the biggest thing I even felt while I was still making game reviews and top 10s. I felt a little like creatively trapped, if you know what I mean, because there was as I was creating more and more content, I started to get more of a desire to create music a lot more, but I was kind of scared to integrate that content into my channel because that's not what a lot of people subscribed for. So So I felt like I was kind of forced to continue creating game reviews and top 10s, even when I reached the point where I fell in love out of creating that content.
Sure, of course. Do you feel like at the time, that sort of more gaming centric top 10s and stuff like that, do you feel like that was kind of performing better than original music as well? Or do you think original music also had a pretty big standing?
Yeah, especially in the gaming field, like those top 10s and game reviews really reached out to a lot of people back then.
Right.
So if anything, like doing music on its own would just be more of like a passion project than something to get views. And that's another thing that I kind of want to tie into. It's like I definitely learned that I shouldn't be creating content for the views, because that I definitely am guilty of doing that for a lot of those videos. And because I did that, a lot of those like aged like milk.
Right. And it probably is just creatively draining too. You know, if I feel like whenever I create for like a mindset other than like I want to make something good that I enjoy or whatnot, I find that I burn out on the project much quicker than otherwise. Right now with this podcast, this is a little bit of a passion project for me because most of the things I talk about just with friends in general is creative things, and being able to share that with all the people watching, it's like combining two different worlds. And I've felt a crazy amount of ambition and dedication that has not like left since the first day I started doing this. But I've definitely like been in that kind of trap before where I do worry about branding. Again, my channel is like smaller scale, so like the stakes are a little bit differently. Whether or not I upload myself making a sandwich or making a full-on movie doesn't change, numbers per se as much anyway. So, I can't say that I felt the exact same thing, but definitely creating for reasons other than just personal growth or whatnot, it affects your mindset so positively when making. Like, it feels like you have more of a purpose when creating or whatnot. And a lot of other creators can contest to this. You see interviews and podcasts all the time of other people saying the exact same thing you said, where it's just like, I got caught in this trap of like, I have to upload what people want or whatnot. And then ultimately, you find that you enjoy creating less. And nowadays, in particular, do you feel like those kind of videos that you originally make, do you think that those are now like, I feel like I've been seeing less and less of those kind of videos nowadays because, YouTube trends just change like all the time. And because you've been on the scene for so long, a question I wanted to ask is just like, how do you in general feel about like the different trends that change, not just in what the audiences want to see, but also in what creators want to make or whatnot? Do you feel like the disconnect between what audiences want and what creators want to make has been getting like bigger over time on YouTube? Or do you think it's just the ratio just keeps changing? Or
I think it's really just there is change happening all the time with what people want to watch and what people want to make. The only thing that you can do from a creator point of view is just to be able to adapt. That's the biggest thing, because nobody as a creator is able to do 100% what they want to do on an online platform. That's just a brutal truth to it.
Right.
There's always some sort of compromise that has to happen.
Yeah. Compromising. I guess at what extent do you feel like you have to agree with the system and let some of your creative direction like slide a little bit? Like, do you feel like you're doing that less nowadays, but also to what extent do you feel that basically?
Not too much these days, because here's the good thing about online content creation now. There's so many different platforms that you can create for now. Like, nothing's just tied to YouTube anymore like it used to be back in the day, right? Like, right. You also have Twitter, you also have Instagram, TikTok, even though I haven't really done that. But...
And with music specifically, there are tons of different streaming sites nowadays. Back in the day, I think, around when you started, I don't think Spotify was really a thing yet, right?
Yeah, that was definitely not really a thing. If anything, the big giant there was iTunes.
Right. So there's more and more opportunities opening up, and you feel like now you can kind of create what you really want to create without any worry about specifically trying to beat algorithms or whatnot, or reaching trends and whatnot.
Oh yeah, just the power of digital music distribution today is massive. Like, I feel like there's almost no barriers, to try and like breach anymore. Like, the only thing that I can think of in terms of that is just licensing for some covers, because there are some hurdles that you have to jump over. Not a lot of artists, especially in other countries, release their stuff officially in North America. So there's a bunch of red tape involving that. So
right. Now, so relatively recent as the time of recording this, I'm not entirely sure when you guys were watching this, but you recently released an album, correct? Or worked on an album? Can you explain exactly who's behind the album? Or who's worked on it?
I'm trying to think, because I'm honestly involved in so many different projects.
Okay, gotcha.
The only album that I did kind of unofficially release by myself was a VGM album. I solely released through Bandcamp. It was just like it's just like a compilation of like my first bunch of VGM covers. But what I am actually planning to do is that I even tested the grounds recently with a couple singles. I'm probably going to be re-releasing all of the licensable tracks as a bigger album through like Spotify and iTunes officially, so that I can have those, so all the right royalties can be paid to the official composers there, because that's the kind of gray area that you have to deal with if you're doing VGM covers. If you decide to, if you're just starting out and you decide to do covers, the thing that you have to realize is that releasing an unlicensable video game song is actually illegal. But you'll find that there's a lot of video game composers out there that encourage covers at the same time. So
yeah, it's kind of similar to just using gameplay in YouTube videos in general, right? The whole debacle of like, it is created by someone else, but I'm using it to create something else. So at what point is it transformative? Do you find that, like, in your music experience, do you find that you've run into more problems with things outside it, like licensing outside of video games, or do you think you run into more problems with video games specifically?
I would say video games more specifically, because it gets really strange when it comes to licensing for video games, especially because there's a lot of video game creators and developers that come from different countries, so there's different laws in those different countries, right? That's where it gets really complicated. And
I guess like a lot of mainstream artists, they will have music and then they'll have the record label, and that's two entities you deal with. But with video games, you have the composer, but that's all published for a specific game, which is owned by a specific publisher and whatnot.
Right.
So I can imagine just the licensing gets crazy, especially when so many songs or so many pieces in video games are remixes or covers of previous pieces in the series or whatnot. So I can imagine it's just an entire minefield of things you have to jump through in order to get it like fully legit and licensed and whatnot. So you said you're planning on re-releasing some as full licensed in like an album. That's kind of like something you want to work towards.
Yeah, exactly. Mostly just to finally get my music out there on digital platforms, but also to do the right thing and make sure the right people are paid.
Sure. Because those composers make amazing pieces. You definitely don't do it from ill will to do covers.
Yeah.
Of it.
Yeah, that's why, like, even with the VGM album that I did put out there, I put it out there for free, like, because I didn't want to put something out that I didn't create myself or compose myself and make money from it, right? So
right. Yeah,
but even then, it's just I still want to do the right thing there. But yeah, it's also making me think about my involvement with creating other VGM music for other albums as well, because speaking of albums, like, I have appeared on multiple compilation albums, specifically by Gamelark Records. I was in a couple. So I was on a Sonic themed album called Supersonic by Gamelark. So I had a Sonic R song on there, and I also did Mog's Mixtape, which was a Final Fantasy album. I also have a song on that.
Now, recently, I think where I got confused with the album is that I think like about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, you released a single that you linked an album to in the description, and I was wondering about that album specifically, like what your involvement was. Was that just one piece that you were working on for the album, or?
Yeah, you must be talking about the most recent one that I was involved with is Cry of the Planet, but
right?
It's Game Grooves. So Game Grooves contacted me if I wanted to do a song for charity, and I actually already was working on a song at the time that seemed to fit in with the theme already, so I figured, hey, why not? They want a really fast turnaround time, so I'll just go for it.
So perfect time.
Yeah, it was. So speaking of Final Fantasy, that was another Final Fantasy song that I pitched in for that album. So that one was a lot of fun to do, and good for a good cause too. So for all sides, I think we were all pretty happy there.
That's good. Did it feel nice to kind of go back to like filming yourself while doing it and set up the different camera angles and the lights and stuff like that? Did it kind of feel like a time warp a bit, or have you just kind of become desensitized to it?
Oh yeah, I've definitely become desensitized to it because even though it doesn't seem like it, I make a ton of videos. If I think about it, I've been doing it for the past year. I've been doing all the video, not all of it. I would say 95% of the video for Julia Henderson. So I've been doing like all the planning, all the filming, all the editing of her videos too. So I've been like low key working on other channels as well.
Gotcha. Now, when it comes to so obviously making music is very different from like making videos or whatnot. What are some of your like favorite aspects of both art forms, and like ones that like do you I imagine that you more fancy music creation, but are there certain things about like videography that you wish kind of transferred towards music or whatnot? Like, what are some of your favorite or least favorite aspects of those?
If anything, I feel like I don't really feel restricted in terms of videography and also making music. Like, I view those two as two separate platforms for my creativity, because there's so many different sides of me. So it's good to be able to get both of those out there. In terms of video, the thing that I least enjoy doing is the amount of work and time it takes to set up a shot.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially because I took a film class in school when I was there for a couple of years. I learned a few tips and tricks and like all these like different shots. So it's kind of a kick in the back to me, because now that I know all these cool shots, it's like I can't not do them. So it just adds a lot more time to the filming times, which I don't enjoy when it takes so much time. But it's just I have to just like stick through it because I know it's going to be worth it by the time I reach the editing stage.
Yeah, and anytime you don't do it and then you see it later, you're going to start feeling it, and that's what you're going to think about every time you see that video. You start thinking about like, oh, man, I should have put the camera there instead of there. I should have tweaked the light a little bit. Even we were like 20 minutes or so late to this particular interview because I was busy setting up just the simplest of things, like a backdrop, a microphone, and a light or whatnot. If I had no access to these things or no experience in how to use them, I would have just done it in like pitch darkness, and the interview would have started immediately on time or whatnot, and it would have looked awful. But it's
worth it to take that extra little bit of time just to make everything look good.
Yeah. And there's obviously an extent to which you go, right? At some point, you have to understand that like no project is ever going to be completely perfect. You can't,
Yeah.
you know, it would take all of your lifetime to make it a completely perfect project. So you have to see some corners and say, hey, that part is not as necessary as this part or whatnot.
Yeah, at some point, the law of diminishing returns is going to kick in.
Yes, definitely. And that's something we talk a lot about on this podcast, is just understanding practicality and kind of bounding your art by it. So that way you don't just reach for the stars that you never hit, you know. That's not to say you shouldn't be ambitious, but obviously you need to have your projects bound by reality. Reality is what's most concrete in anything. So we talk about that quite a bit. One thing I'd like to ask is, because with your music creating albums and licensing and whatnot, in general, you probably end up working with a lot of other musicians. And even if it's not for your song specifically, there's a lot of collaboration going on in your art field. How do you feel collaboration affects the music field specifically, as opposed to maybe other art forms? Like, do you feel like it has certain hindrances you wish weren't there, or do you feel like there's certain strengths that you don't find in other art forms, like with collaboration in general in the music art form?
With music specifically, being able to communicate to another musician is definitely a challenge that I wasn't ready for when I was starting out with that, because I'm not exactly a formally trained musician. Even though I have taken some classes, I even have a certificate from Berkeley from doing online studies. My brain just naturally doesn't think theory first. I've always done everything by ear. So there's some good things and bad things to that, because I can pick up something immediately if I hear it. But at the same time, I'm not able to regurgitate that information to someone else. So there can be a bit of challenge of communicating that to other musicians, which is what I learned really quickly.
Of course.
So I definitely had to, like, it's still an ongoing process today. Like I still have to keep picking up on the way other musicians like communicate ideas to each other, and just like roll with the punches there, because for the most part, as a musician, it doesn't seem like it, but I really don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, it's like working with two different languages, right?
Yeah.
Like, if someone who goes entirely off of the senses or whatnot by hearing, or like even with cooking, you know, some people go entirely off of tasting or looking and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And then there's another person who might have studied for a long time and learned this whole other kind of language. Both people might be able to make the exact same product, but just communicating it over can be difficult. I know I have a friend who my process of art creation is very much verbal. I very much explain everything in detail. I try to come up with specific vocabulary words and whatnot, and I try to explain things very clearly that way. What I found, though, is that a lot of other people I've worked with or encountered don't work exactly the same way. A lot of them is just like, okay, let me look at it. Okay, let me tweak that. That's better. And it's like, well, I could have spent a long time trying to figure out verbally or process exactly how it's going to be better. It's just interesting to see how people work differently. And I've run into a lot of like, not creative problems. That's a little bit harsh of a word, but every kind of like bump in the road with another creator is oftentimes just being able to communicate the same idea to each other, but we're both communicating it differently. It's always interesting to see how artists work that way. But I know with music specifically, at least I imagine, I'm not a musician myself, so I don't want to pretend to know too much. But from what I imagine with music, it can be very difficult to also just communicate and work out specific parts of the song, because, you know, songs are supposed to be one continuous thing. Have you had trouble with like specifically having maybe an instrumentalist do something or vocalist do something when it's just not feeling like very cohesive between the song or between both your pieces or whatnot?
Yeah, that's something that definitely happens like throughout like any collaborative process. It doesn't really have to happen with music.
Right.
It's just a matter of being able to communicate like anything that's anything that stands out strangely, just being like, hey, this part of the song sounds weird. Or it's like, or I'm not hearing this right in this specific part because of this. You just have to be able to communicate that and then just work towards a solution together.
Right.
Like, maybe they have a side of the story to it. It's like, I did this because I thought it sounded good.
Right.
Or I did this because some music theory explanation that I can't understand. But,
right.
Which happens sometimes. But you just have to make a decision from there. Either give the benefit of the doubt or just say like, hey, let's try something else. And if it doesn't work, we'll just go with this anyways. So that at least we know that we gave it a shot.
Right. And do you have like, are there like is there a project that ultimately fell through just through like either bad communication or creative differences or whatnot with regards to collaborations? And then do you also have like a project that you always think of like, wow, that's one of the best creative collaborations I've done? Like, do you have basically projects that fall through because of collaboration, basically?
Not exactly. The only reason why collaborations would have fallen through for me was just scheduling, really. Just
Gotcha.
like not being able to work out enough time to work on it. It's like I've even had to like drop offers because it didn't line up with my work schedule.
Right. Sure. Yeah. So, do you think ultimately, like you've had a good experience with finding people, and I mean, I imagine a big part of it is just asking the right people too. I mean,
Yeah.
Sometimes you might see some red flags of like, okay, we creatively wouldn't work very well together, so I'm going to steer a different direction, and that probably is a big reason for why so many of yours are successful, right? Because you understand who you're talking to and whatnot.
Yeah. And when it comes to good collaborations too, like there's definitely some that like I still look back on and I'm just like, wow, that was just really solid. Like even though we've done a lot of music together, my favorites collaboration to this day is still it's a End of All Fire Emblem Fates cover that Julia and I did. Like for me, that still like hits right on the money. Runner up would have to be I think it was an Ace Attorney song. Oh yeah, Professor Layton versus Ace Attorney cover that I did with Austin Eruption, because that was my first time properly mixing live drums, and especially in in online music creation, you don't really get that opportunity because not a lot of people have a living situation where they can even have a drum set in. So just to have that opportunity was a lot of fun.
That's great. And so do you find that you have a preference towards either original music over covers? Like, is there one that you actually prefer doing?
So the way that I see it now, I used to really hate doing covers. Like I was creatively stubborn where everything always had to come from me and nobody else, because otherwise it wouldn't be a true reflection of me. But I started looking at it from a different angle, because essentially what I see covers as is like a way of connecting with others, because people are searching out for their favorite games or favorite artists, and they might accidentally stumble onto a cover, for instance, and they might click it and they might end up liking. So I just view it as a form of like umbrella content that helps like find an audience for myself.
Sure.
Because if I just stubbornly stick to creating my own music time after time, it kind of goes back to that analogy. If a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it,
did it actually happen?
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, art, the whole point of art is that it's communication. It's dialogue between the artist and the audience. And if there is no audience, it's no longer communication. So if you're making art specifically for no one to see, then are you actually making art? Because if it's, I mean, I don't know. I think a debate could be made either way, but there's definitely something you got to keep in mind there. With regards to you originally not liking video game covers, do you feel like you were more sour to it because you felt like you kind of had to do it in order to keep up with the algorithm and stuff like that? And then once you made your change to doing both original and video game stuff, did you feel like, oh, it's not so bad? Like, do you feel like that had a shift in your perspective? Just the fact that you kind of you felt like you were a little bit more chained to it?
Just trying to think back to when I started doing it. So this is what happened. I don't know how I stumbled onto it. So I stumbled onto, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this artist, but Josiah. He does
yes, I do know Josiah.
Yeah, he does a lot of video game covers. He recently released an album of original music as well. But yeah, I stumbled upon his channel, and I was just blown away by like the musicianship and like the amount of fun he seemed to be having, and just everything about like his music. It was conveyed through the music too. Like everything just felt so genuine, and that just connected to me. And that in itself like inspired me to like spark that idea. It was like, maybe I should give this a shot. And then I believe it was, I don't know. Yeah, it was one of the SGC conventions where I finally met him. Like,
which year?
Just, I don't remember what year. I don't
I
know
went
if it
to
was like
SGC in 2015, I think.
Oh, that was a fun convention. I was at that one. Yeah.
Oh my
But it was-
gosh. I might
Yeah.
actually have an autograph from you in my hat because I was going around with the hat, like getting a lot of people's autographs. But like there were so many people there that I honestly
everyone was there.
everyone was
That-
there. It was a good convention. And then next year they're like, they canned it. Like, no more SGC. I'm
Yeah.
like, what? I had so much fun.
That sucks because I feel like out of every convention that I went to, that was the convention.
Yeah, for sure. And like I haven't been to very many, but out of ones I've just seen online or whatnot, like that one felt like when I saw that one, I was like, okay, that's the kind of convention I want to go to. And then after it was gone, I never really heard of any that scratched the same itch. Like that one was very much enjoyable. Yeah, that was an exciting day for me. I met so many creators and it was a darn good time. Anyway, I don't mean to go too much on SGC, but it's very possible I have a signature from you then on my hat. Like I said, there's so many people though. It was so long ago I can't remember all the people I got, but very, very good day. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to derail. Go ahead, continue.
No, that's okay. So just thinking back, so yeah, it wasn't 2015 that I first met Josiah. It might have been 2014, I believe. I think I was also at 2013, but yeah, I wasn't even into VGM music at that time or like doing covers. That wasn't even a thing in my head back then. So yeah, it must have been 2014. So yeah, I met Josiah Everhart. Yeah, for those who's listening who's not familiar with him. Out of everyone that I've met, I even met like YouTubers who were like large, like meeting like PBG, like JonTron and all that, the Completionist. I was not as nervous as I was as meeting Josiah. Because that's how much his like content like, you know, connected to me because that kind of rekindled like my love for like making music as well, because that's something that I put on the back burner because I spent so long on music and I got burnt out on it and reached a point that I didn't want to do it again. So that was just all pushed in the closet, but it was that kind of sparked that idea back into me. And then I don't remember what year it was. It might have been just 2014 again. I went to MagFest for the first time and saw Josiah there again. And I also met Amy Waters there. At the time, I didn't know she was a musician, but I discovered that after the fact. And I saw her videos as well. And I was just like, okay, this is just amazing. This videography, like amazing videography combined with like great music as well. I'm like, I got to do this too. Like that for me was just like the final, like, okay, I got to try this.
Final nudge in the right direction.
Yeah.
Do you feel that like conventions just ultimately had a big impact on your creative mindset? Like, did you find yourself a lot more inspired just meeting all the creators and stuff?
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Like, it just created, going to conventions just created so much of like an emotional connection to what I do. Because like, when I started doing it, I never knew anyone that did the same thing as me. So being able to travel and meet people who do the same thing, that just like sparks so much inspiration.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, conventions are a little bit on a hold right now, and I feel like that might kind of be a good segue. This is a question I'd kind of like to ask as many interviewees as possible. During everything that's been going on in 2020, have you felt that's made you more creatively inspired or creatively drained? And this is mainly for my own inquiry, just because every creator I talk to says something different. There seems to be people on all ends of the spectrum. So I'm curious how 2020 has affected you creatively.
Creatively, honestly, I'm fine. Because I think it's because I'm naturally like an extreme introvert, especially when it comes to like my creative side. So just like being on my own for a long period of time doesn't really bother me to that extent in terms of creating stuff. But in terms of like, you know, obviously on a social standpoint, I'm really bored.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's interesting because I know like when all this thing started happening, some of the people I talked to just completely stopped creatively for like several months just because I don't know, maybe, some people probably work better with like a more positive mindset. I kind of find that when things seem a little bit more down in the dumps, that usually makes me create a little bit more and I get a little bit more into the creation side. And then things start going good. That's when I start like being a little bit less consistent and whatnot. I've since gotten a pretty good handle at just maintaining consistency in general, but I just do find it interesting how like everybody reacts a little bit differently. Do you feel that you've been like consuming more art than usual because of 2020 though? Like, do you find yourself more connected to what other people are creating these days, out of like necessity, or has you been ultimately spending less time consuming art or whatnot and focusing on other areas to spend your time on?
Yeah, that's the strange thing about these times, because I've been finding myself less and less consuming all these different types of content and art. Right. Where like on paper that seems like the right, like the natural thing to do because I have all this time, but I'm finding more and more that I'm just spending all this time creating music and working on music, just like totally honing in and using tunnel vision on the music that itself, which is something that I've never really felt. So I'm just kind of like riding this creative momentum right now. And
this is the most momentum you felt in your career, or like?
Because I have nothing else to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is interesting how that works because I've definitely know people who also just suddenly have become experts in so many art fields just through watching other people's things and critiquing them and stuff like that, and now their brain works completely differently just because they've consumed so much. And then there's other people who just like you just go straight to the creative block and just keep on hammering things out because they feel like, what else am I going to do, right? And there's also I've noticed some creators who have taken this as an opportunity to explore other parts of their lives, try to figure out more about their personalities or something, or work more on health and stuff like that. So it's just interesting seeing how different creators react. And that's why I'd like to bring it up in future podcasts as well. Because I think because everybody kind of treats it differently, it's important so that they hear other people's perspectives, so they can also understand that other people might be feeling the same way as them. They're very strange times. But anyway, I just wanted...
Speaking of which, like the one thing that I realized with this pandemic, and it's been kind of hammering at me for a while, the most valuable thing that anyone can have as a creator is time. And definitely. That can be really hard to find sometimes, depending on like whatever life circumstances that you have, or like, the work that you have. But when all this time is presented to you on a plate, on a silver platter, you got to figure out where you want to use that, because
you can't just ignore it. There's no more excuse. You have to do something with that time.
And it's kind of like food too. It's like, it's going to expire eventually. So it's like, you have to portion wisely.
It's like food. I like that. I love analogies like that. I say them all the time. I get weird looks.
Everything always ties back into food for me. I love food.
Food is the core of everything ultimately. No, I totally agree though. Like, you feel some sense of responsibility to further your creative endeavors when you have something like this. If you're not working or you're not going to school or something like that, coming up, I'm going to start doing both. So I'm trying to like get as much done as I can coming up. And even like you said, like the reason we scheduled this time is because you feel like you're going to get a little bit more busy as the months go on and stuff like that. So but it's important, fellas, make sure you stay healthy, use your time wisely, obviously, and then wear a mask. That'd probably be good. But we're going to move on from the doom and gloom. Given your like many years on the YouTube platform or digital art creation in general, is there something you kind of wish you knew going in that you later then learned just through like trial and error? Like if there's something you could tell yourself when you first started, what do you think would be like the most important information to say? Now, obviously, as so much of art is just learning, and you can't expect that even one person telling you something is going to change your entire outlook. But if there's something you kind of wish you had a grasp on early on, what would that be?
First thing that immediately jumped to my mind: always take advantage of momentum, because that is lost really quickly.
Right. Definitely. Absolutely. I mean, like if you let it just go away, it's gonna be a long time till you find it again. What I find is that when I'm very much inspired to work on something, I'll keep on working on it. Sometimes I'll work on it a little too much, which you got to be careful about, because you don't want to overwork. Because if you do overwork, then you will lose it even quicker,
Exactly.
But what I have found too, though, is that the inspiration, while it does go away, I feel like it can almost always be found again. It does take time, though, but if you're not utilizing the momentum, if you're not acting on the inspiration, it's going to go away and it's going to be much more difficult to find it again, basically. And that's just something we always circle back to on this podcast. It's just like understanding that ambition takes dedication as well. Ambition takes motivation. You cannot just strive on just being inspired to do something. Inspiration does not drive the car for you,
It really does not. You almost have to look at it as another job. Sometimes you just have to show up for your shift and just do it. Definitely. Because even if you don't want to, because at the end of the day, like, you're going to be grateful that you put in that work, because that's keeping the wheel turning.
Yeah. It's very interesting using like the comparison of a job in art, right? Because a lot of people make the distinction between the two. Like art is not work or whatnot. Like art is me time while work is their time or whatnot. And I think it's interesting as creators like yourself who financially gain from their art or whatnot. Do you feel that financially gaining from your art has changed your look on it at all, or if you found it just to be mostly the same because you've been able to keep seeing it as something that's just fun to do or whatnot?
Yeah, for me, it's something that's just still fun to do. If anything, any sort of financial gain, no matter how little or big it is just a bonus to me, because the way I've always kind of viewed content creation or just making music in general is just it's always something that I've done for fun. Any attempt that I've made to try and make it my main gig has never worked out, because as soon as it just becomes, like my main focus and like my main job, the amount of stress that I get, it just increases tenfold, because now I'm not just creating for fun. It's like I have to create to survive, and that changes the content that I have to make, which in turn makes it into something that's not fun to do. So
and if it's not fun to do, it's not fun to watch for you either, and if you're not enjoying looking at your own content, then you might be something wrong with the content. So
the few times I've even remotely thought of that, or even like said to other creators or like announced on Twitter, it's like, I'm gonna do this content creation thing like full time, I've always ditched it like a week after, being like, this is a terrible idea. I'm just gonna backtrack.
So do you see a future where you're entirely financially dependent on your art, or do you feel like it's just best for you to keep it kind of at the level that it is? I know that's kind of a tough question, but
for me personally, it's like, if it just continues at the same level where I'm at right now, I'm perfectly fine with it, because ultimately that's what I can control. I can't control if I suddenly, an audience appears out of nowhere and I get all this like monetary gain from that. But I can't expect that to happen either. Like, that's just like no way to create with the expectation that you're going to have an audience. But if it does happen, then it's just like, sure, I'll just ride that wave if it does come, but I'm not going to sit out there and wait for it.
Absolutely. I think it's an excellent mindset to have, because there's only so many things in life you can control. But there's reason behind that saying, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. You see what you got, and then you just control what you can control. And then, life is what you make it. You do what you can do, and then whatever happens ends up happening. None of us could really stop this pandemic from happening. It just happened, and now we just have to deal with it. But it is what you make it. It's just remember to keep the positives in mind and keep working towards, something creative that you enjoy. And then basically I feel like that's how you create the strongest creative mindset. Exactly. A lot of the people who have kind of burnt out, I feel like you were saying earlier, people who go in with the expectation of getting that numbers return or whatnot, whether the numbers be fame or money or whatnot. So many people go in with that mindset, and then most of the time they just, they get burnt out super quickly. And we talk a lot. I
definitely felt that too. Now that I think about burnouts, that kind of ties in around like the last year before I took my unannounced hiatus to go to school. Because around that last year of content creation of like 2016, like I was like just burnt out on YouTube as a whole.
Right.
And content create, it got to a point where it just like I even like noticed myself where it's just like, man, like everything that I create is just like the same thing every month. Like there's no growth. It just like just feels like I'm putting out a video, a song, and
there's like nothing worse than for an artist to feel that they can't evolve their work even if they tried. That seems to be like an ultimate stab in the back. Is just, I can't get better. Like I locked in like one position. I can't, because like I one thing we've said a lot of this podcast is just that art kind of feels like you just constantly creating something that's a little bit better than what you created before or whatnot. And I think that's kind of the ideal position.
Yeah.
And people who don't let their content evolve or whatnot, I think that's the people who start to struggle creatively the most, is just people who strive for the same or whatnot. And YouTube is kind of tough for that because people subscribe for a specific type of content.
Exactly.
So, you know, you see those trends quite frequently. But you have to give appreciation towards the people who are able to evolve and keep, you know, audiences engaged in the way or whatnot. You know, there are several channels from the dinosaur times that are still up and kicking, making different kind of content to this day because they did some slight adjustment. But basically, it's very important to always leave room for your content to evolve, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of those like old channels that are still sticking around today. Like having made those adjustments, you still see the line that connects everything throughout them. They haven't really, like gone through like some radical change that has like lost like most of their following.
We mentioned him earlier, but you know, like Peanut Butter Gamer, for an example, his content has changed a little bit since when he like first started, but there's always this string of consistency that you see. And I think that consistency is ultimately just his passion. And like his passion remains in his videos when he's creating or whatnot. And that's the part you want to keep. You want to keep the passion. And then ultimately, you know, one thing that's kind of great about YouTube is that it is a little bit more personality specific. So if you're keeping the passion within yourself and being true to yourself inside that consistent form of content, a lot of people, even if they don't totally understand it, are watching because of your personality or whatnot, you know. And that's kind of one of the better things about YouTube. Obviously, there's some things that's not so great about YouTube, but yeah, basically, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said the consistency that could be found in those channels. There's always that passion that you can still see, and regardless of what kind of video they're making. And
exactly.
Yeah,
like that's what ultimately like keeps the viewer engaged. Like if you're into what you're creating, so as long as that's happening, then everything's all good.
Definitely.
Because I've seen different channels outside of gaming where it's the complete opposites, where they've made those adjustments because of YouTube, but it's very clear that they don't even enjoy those
they would normally make.
Exactly. Right. So, and those channels, like, unfortunately, I've kind of like, you know, not doing as good or like crashing down completely. So it sucks to see, but there are different sides after all. Yeah,
there are. I mean, and you know, there's no big guidebook. It's not like you sign up your channel, they mail you a giant 3,000 page book or something with just all like the rules and like, by the way, YouTube's gonna change before you know it, so get ready,
so even if that came out, it would be outdated in the next week.
Yes, exactly. By the time it ships, it's outdated, and they have like a couple more amendments they need to add or whatnot. But ultimately, you know, just create what you want to create, and I feel like that's ultimately gonna have so much more longevity to it than creating what you think people want to see, because ultimately people do want to see what you want to create, or at least they want to see what people want to create. You know, audiences, there are demographics and whatnot, and people like certain type of videos, but I feel like for the most part with YouTube, people subscribe to see the people and not the content created. And I feel like that's what kind of divides the platform from other platforms a little bit, at least like more traditional ones like cable and whatnot. A lot of times people even then, you know, actors have a big play. I don't know. But stay true to your personality, you know.
Exactly.
Enjoy what you're creating.
And that kind of ties in back to the talk of me rebranding as well, because that was just me, you know, focusing in and realizing it's just like, you know what, I'm just gonna do whatever I want to do. I don't care how boring it is.
Right.
Because here's the thing about taking 3 years off. The attention span of the internet is really, really short.
It's lower than 3 years, that's for sure.
Yeah. So as someone like myself, if I just like outright disappear without a word for that long and come back, it's tough to say, but no one remembers who I am. So if anything, that was like a blessing for me, because like this is the perfect time for me to start over, because I can do it without any guilt or qualms at all.
Of course. Yeah.
Because it's literally, I'm just starting over.
Yeah,
and
for sure. And so like, I don't want to get like super deep into the name change. I'm just curious from my own standpoint because like my name is kind of in my channel, but I with Zurachi, with the name Zurachi, do you feel like the audience puts too many of their own ideas into what Zurachi means to them and whatnot? And when you change it to Lorenzo, do you feel like it was just kind of a reminder to both the audiences and yourself that this is your work, like you are the personality, you are the creator they're watching and whatnot?
Yeah, and I think it goes both ways too, because like even when I hear the name Zurachi, I associate it I associate that name with a character I was playing, not even myself. So and also like the type of content that I was creating at a time. So it's all time fixed. It doesn't really, I don't really feel that connection to that anymore. So it was really the disassociation with that, which played a big role in me wanting to just shift towards my name. The only reason why like I'm still sticking with Zurachi as my social media tags right now is because I'm still trying to think of a tag that isn't long as hell, because I have a long freaking name, dude. And it's just like, if I just make my like Twitter tag Lorenzo de Sequera, no one's gonna remember how to spell that.
That's true. It's true.
Like I have firsthand experience, like like from years ago, like years ago, I need to find it again. Like I have this long freaking chain of tweets of just like Starbucks, like coffee places, like fast food restaurants, just spelling my name wrong. And it's hilarious, but it's also something that I have to accept too, because like I can't just make my social media tag my name.
No, and it's not like you could just like easily change your name either. I mean, I guess you can, but like, a name is nothing but a person behind it,
Yeah.
Ultimately you want people to know you as you, and Lorenzo is just a way to categorize that or whatnot. So,
and if anything, it's also a way for people that knew me back in the day to find me again. So that's why it's like, it's not a complete shift yet, but it's like, I'm near the end of the transition, if you know what I mean.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you done like a lot of work before YouTube, like collaborating with other artists or whatnot who would know you by your name? Like, how much networking did you do before YouTube?
Like in terms of like the musicians that I played with back in the day, there's like that much that like knows me by name, but otherwise not too much. Like in terms of what's associated with my name, like I lived a pretty low profile life, even when I was committed to music full time. I'm just like playing in bands and all that. It's like everything was always more associated with the band name itself that I was in, not my name personally. So if anything, yeah, there's that.
All right. Well, we're actually reaching about the end of the clock here. So I'm going to have like a little bit of a wrap up question then. This kind of pertains a little bit to what I asked earlier about like, if there's something you would say to your other creators, but like to people out there who are watching and might be interested in like the music field specifically or whatnot, is there something you feel like they should know ultimately going in that might help their mindsets and help them thrive, at least in their content at the very least?
So if there's any advice that I can give that to anyone that wants to get into this at all, you really got to follow the old saying that content is king, because you got to be able to provide some value to the viewer, because you got to think from their end. They're setting time aside to watch you and your content.
Right.
So you gotta be able to make use of that time well. Don't go on long tangents for no reason. You got to get to the point, and you got to make that point big. You just got to find that one thing you want to communicate to them and just roll with it.
I think that's great advice. Isolating exactly what you want to say and cutting out the filler, just what you say, here it is and whatnot. I think it's great advice. All right. Well, we're going to be wrapping up then. Thank you so much for joining. I know like the timeline's kind of weird about when this is coming out, but is there something you would like to mention about your personal project, something that people might want to look out for, or just in general where they should keep an eye out for your content?
Yeah, for sure. So, both Julia Henderson and I have been working on a lot of personified music, like I mentioned earlier. We're gearing it up towards to becoming an album eventually, but right now we're just still making songs for it. So just keep an eye out on our social media platforms for that. On Twitter, I'm still Zurachi TV. So look out for that. And also, like I mentioned as well, I'm still working towards re-releasing a lot of my old covers that are licensable onto digital music platforms. I already re-released and remastered a couple of anime covers that I did as a test to see how that would work out. So I did a Naruto cover of Naruto Shippuden cover of Distance, and a Dragon Ball Z cover, Chala Head Chala. So, and that seemed to work out pretty well and was released pretty fast, even after I submitted it. So yeah, just been working on a lot of music and a lot of videos as well on Julia Henderson's channel. So I would check that out as well.
And I assume a good way to find wherever you upload, Twitter, I assume, is a decent place for that, right?
Yeah, Twitter is my main stomping ground. I also do Instagram as well, Zurachi TV as well. Who knows when I'm going to change my IDs eventually. So you can still search up Lorenzo de Sequera on Google and find all my stuff there if need be. But for now, still Zurachi TV until I figure something out that is catchy and not long.
Well, there you go. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me again. I really much appreciate it. Like I said, I've been watching since like 2015, so it's always awesome to meet creators who've been watching for a long time. Also, just people who've been on the scene for so long. You know, if I were to grab people who just started this year, you know, it'd be a completely different conversation. Still an interesting one, albeit, but like, you know, it's always nice to bring some
because I don't really understand the perspective of someone just up and coming right now. Yeah, because I come from like a different era of content creation. So like even that's something I'm curious about. Like how does it look when you're starting out in this day and age?
Yeah, that is an interesting conversation. I should have that sometime. Just find someone who is just starting out, bring them in just to see what their kind of perspective is or whatnot.
Yeah, I'd watch that.
But either way, that's for another episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, if you want to check some of these things and more segmented topics, you can always check them out on my main channel. And then I'll have more interviews coming in the future, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you guys in the next episode. So long.